Kate, you've written a book about Dr. Anthony Fauci, and the intended age of the reader is what makes this book a little unusual. What's the target age?
So this is a picture book, which means it's intended for kids in elementary school. And I know that's not the usual age we would think about somebody, wanting to pick up a biography of Dr. Anthony Fauci. But what I've found during the pandemic, I've still been talking with lots of kids, visiting their schools via Zoom, and kids are curious about everything that's been happening during this time. Dr. Fauci is somebody they see on the news weekly and sometimes nightly. And so they're curious about who is this person who's been telling us to wear our masks and social distance, wash our hands, and now get our vaccine. So we thought it would be a great way to share his story with kids and also hopefully inspire some future scientists.
Well, you mentioned we're seeing Dr. Fauci on an almost nightly basis, but what actually inspired you to want to write this book for such young kids?
To be honest with you, I was writing a completely different book. I was working on a book called The Next Great Scientist, which is all about the childhoods of scientists that we know. And I had sent an email to Dr. Fauci's office to ask him about his childhood as part of that larger book. And when I heard back from them and got the email from Dr. Fauci about how he used to deliver prescriptions on his bicycle riding around Brooklyn to deliver those prescriptions from his dad's pharmacy growing up, I realized that his story might make a book of its own, a picture book of its own, especially again, since so many kids are curious about this guy they see on the news.
Well, the name of the book is Dr. Fauci, How a Boy from Brooklyn Became America's Doctor, and that is exactly what this book is about. It spends a lot of time on his childhood in Brooklyn and sets up many themes that you pay off later in the pages where he reaches adulthood. I like how you relate his questioning and wonderment about the world to the way he would ponder his aquarium in his childhood bedroom.
So Dr. Fauci, when I interviewed him for this book, I was able to talk with him on Zoom a couple times. One of the things that stood out to me was that lifelong sense of curiosity. And it was really planted in his childhood when he was growing up in Brooklyn. The curiosity about the tropical fish he kept in his bedroom. He was always wondering about the planets. He was always reading this set of encyclopedias that the family had, which is something from my history too. I loved our World Book encyclopedias. So I really connected with that sense of curiosity. And whenever I'm writing a biography of somebody famous, one of the things I think about is where were the seeds of what this person accomplished planted? Where are the stories in their childhood that show why they became this person we know about today? So curiosity for Dr. Fauci was really at the heart of that.
When you were interviewing Dr. Fauci, did he make those connections between what he was doing in his childhood and what he did later on in his adult life, or was that you that were helping draw those connections out of him?
Oh, I think he sees a very direct connection. He talked about, how his mom said, you listen to everybody, you respect everybody. And that's been really central to his work at the National Institutes of Health and National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease. And when you're problem solving and collaborating, it really does require not just knowledge, but listening skills too.
Well, Dr. Fauci's story could easily be told in a very academic way that would not be very appealing to kids. How did you take that into consideration when writing the book, and how did it affect your approach?
I think the biggest thing we wanted to do was help kids understand that scientists, including the scientists like Dr. Fauci they see on the news every night, are ordinary people just like they are. They're kids who were curious, and grew up to study science and medicine. And so what I was really looking for was what connections would a kid make to Dr. Fauci when he was a kid? And those were easy to find. He talked about loving to ride his bike around, delivering those prescriptions for his dad's pharmacy, playing sports. He told me great stories about how they used to play stickball in the streets. And so I think kids can relate to that. And in hearing those stories, when they see him on the news, he's this guy in a suit standing at the podium. But I think when they hear those stories from his childhood, they realize, oh, this is somebody just like me who's curious, who's interested in science, and they can see maybe their own potential as well.
You've been telling us many facts about Dr. Fauci's life, and you put them all so beautifully in the book. And as you were saying, you did the research through Zoom interviews?
Some of it, yes. I mean, there's a lot of information about Dr. Fauci out there already. He's been interviewed multiple times, and so I gathered all the information I could about his life without bothering him first, because there is a pandemic going on, so he was kind of a busy guy. But I knew it would be important to talk with him, and those details about his childhood, what he was like when he was the age of my readers, were really important to me. So I did reach out to his office this fall to ask if it might be possible to do a Zoom interview, and they were incredibly helpful. I was able to talk with Dr. Fauci. Actually, he was on his drive home from work, and was able to take about 45 minutes with him to answer some of those questions that weren't addressed elsewhere in other interviews and profiles that were out there in the media. So he was incredibly helpful, incredibly gracious, great storyteller, told some wonderful stories about the stickball games with his buddies and how they would measure how far you could hit the ball by sewers. So those manhole covers that lead down to the sewer, he'd say, well, if you could hit the ball from one sewer to the next, you were pretty good. But if you could hit it 2 sewers, that was pretty good. And I said, so could you hit it 2 sewers? He goes, yeah, I was a 2-sewer guy. Obviously very proud of that. But those little stories are always what I'm looking for when I'm writing a picture book biography, stories that bring this person on the news to life in a different way.
Well, what was Dr. Fauci's initial reaction to the mere idea of a children's book about him?
He was helpful. He was on board with it, and he was happy to be interviewed. And there were lots of follow-up questions too, which is typical when I'm working on a book. You do the research, and then as you're writing, you say, "Oh, I wonder about this," or "I wonder about that." So we had to actually go back and check on things like what color uniforms did high school wear and things like that. And I always felt a little funny, emailing the National Institutes of Health to ask these detailed questions. Did he bat right-handed or left-handed? So we could get the not only the text right, but the illustrations accurate as well. And they were super helpful. His staff was great to work with.
And Alexandra Bai did the illustrations so beautifully for this book. Have you worked with her before?
She really did, didn't she? I absolutely love the art for this book. Alexandra is not an illustrator that I had worked with before. My editor showed me some samples of Alexandra's work, and I thought they were just perfect for the tone we were trying to strike. So she did just a phenomenal job on this book. She was just incredibly professional and so great to work with, and boy, talented.
You've written more than 50 children's books, including a series of books about Ranger, the time-traveling golden retriever. I think stories about a dog who boards the Titanic and who rescues people during the great San Francisco earthquake might become classics and be appreciated by kids even 50 years from now. The Dr. Fauci book is very different. It's very timely. Did you take that timeliness into consideration when comparing it to your other books?
Sure, and it is different in that sense, I think. And I think the publisher, Simon & Schuster, recognized that too. I was finishing up this book in the fall, and they acquired the manuscript in, I think it was December. And normally, a picture book from the time the manuscript is acquired to the time it's actually published is easily a year, and usually more like 2 or 3 years. And this book came together in a matter of months. That's largely due to the credit of my editor at Simon & Schuster, Ken Verlevin, and the illustrator, Alexandra Bai, who just worked incredibly hard to get things to come together, particularly because we knew that kids would have a lot of questions right now this summer. We're entering a phase where young people are starting to be vaccinated, and that's a really big focus of the book too. There's a whole section in the back with information about how vaccines work and how do we know vaccines are safe, and so there's lots of information in there in addition to the story about Dr. Fauci's life.
And your experience with the virus situation goes even beyond writing, I hear.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, just like everybody else, when we were locked down for a year plus, it was frustrating, and it's especially hard, I think, when you want to be able to help and you can't. We're watching all of the first responders, and so when our local health department, when the Clinton County Health Department put out a call for help with their vaccine clinics, they said, we have nurses to put shots in arms, but what we really need is some help with the administrative stuff. We need people to register folks and sign people in and do data entry. And my husband and I said, oh, we can do that. I have a husband who works nights. Tom works at the TV station doing the weather. And so I normally am traveling a lot for my job as an author. I'm visiting schools and libraries all over the country. But that, of course, is off for right now. And so I have a little extra time, too. So we've actually been volunteering at some local vaccine clinics run by the Clinton County Health Department, doing data entry. And that's been great. The staff there have been just working around the clock to get local folks vaccinated and have done an incredible job. So it's been a real joy to be able to work with them and help out just a little.
Well, I think it is such a positive thing to be helping out this way, and your books often have a positive message. What is the message of the Dr. Fauci biography?
You know, I don't always like to say the message is work hard and you can succeed. But I will say that the reason I wanted to write this story and the reason I write other stories about scientists, I've done other picture book biographies and books for middle grade readers about the work of scientists, is to help kids see that they can do that work, that these people are people who love science, who are interested in animals and nature and how the human body works and all kinds of things like that. And so many kids can relate to that, but might initially feel like those jobs are out of their reach and, oh, that's not something I can do, that's something really smart people do, or people who are official and far away. And I want them to see all those jobs as accessible and something that they can do, and to see science as something that belongs to them, something where they can make a difference too.
Spotlight is supported by the Glenn and Carol Pearsall Adirondack Foundation, dedicated to improving the quality of life for year-round residents of the Adirondack Park.